Hello. Today we are talking about primary and secondary succession. What this is, it's kind of like a timeline for the growth of a forest or how a forest changes over time. So the first one's primary succession. What we want to think of here is we've got a situation where we start with bare rock. That could be a new island forms, like the Hawaiian Islands form out of lava, and you have just rock, nothing else on it. Well, slowly over time, you're going to build up a little bit of soil because things like lichen, which will be the first things there, they live on the rock and they die. And then smaller plants and animals also live in the little bits of soil that start to build up, the little dust. And then they die and they add to this soil. And that rock eventually gets covered with soils. Seeds blow in, you get some of your first small plant communities. And then over time, based on shade and how fast some of the larger trees grow, you get this initial forest. And a lot of these ones are the fastest growing trees. They can also be shade tolerant. And then finally, as the forest matures, it reaches a climax where it's mixed. It has a very mixed variety of trees and a mixed variety of plants and animals. So it starts with the bare rock all the way to a climax forest. That's primary succession. From bare rock and no life. That's the important thing. It starts with no life. To a mature forest. Now the next one is secondary succession. It's almost exactly the same, except we're not starting with bare rock. What we start with secondary succession is we have some event that happened, like a forest fire, that kills almost all of the life, but there's still things in the soil that are living. There might be insects. There's going to be seeds that are still viable. There's going to be small burrowing animals, like small mammals that burrow into the soil. So you're not starting from rock. You're starting with a little bit of life. And there's many events that can cause you to start at secondary succession. Forest fire is a good example. But there's other ones like a tsunami or a volcano. And with these, with secondary, you have from a very small amount of life in the soil to all the way at the end where you've got your mature forest again. And with forest fires, this is a cycle. This happens over and over long periods of time. You get this mature forest, it burns down in a big giant fire, and it starts over. And so there's this cycling of the environment. Okay, let's move on. I want to show you some examples. So up here at the top, this is Mount St. Helens. And this is what Mount St. Helens looked like before a major volcanic eruption in March 1980. So before that, the area had been stable for a long time. The forest had been stable. It was a very mature forest, a climax forest. It had been tens of thousands of years since a major eruption. And it looked like we see here in the image where the mountain was nice, had a nice cone to it. You see all these forests around the lakes that are built from the water coming off of the mountain. And then in 1980, there was this huge eruption, and you can find images of this online. Giant eruptions. You can see half the mountain is gone, but also all of that forest, especially near the eruption, is completely obliterated. And depending on where you are around here, whether you're really close to the eruption or a little further away, there was some primary, right? So the explosion would have been strong enough to completely strip away soils in some areas down to the bare rock. That would have been primary succession. And then there was some secondary succession where maybe the forest was blown down, but the soil was still viable. So some primary and some secondary conditions after eruption. Now let's take a look at a few examples from Mount St. Helens over the years as succession has actually taken place, because this has been a very good laboratory for scientists to watch succession take place over the last 40 years. In this first example, we see it starts with a completely dead forest, that image. This is going to be an example of primary succession. So that means nothing was left alive in the soil. This is all ash. It's not even soil, it's just ash. There was no life in the soil. But then you see over time, and it has the years here, you get some seeds that are carried by the wind or animals into the ash. The ash starts to turn into a soil as you get a few of these plants growing in there and dying and adding to the soil. And you get a more diverse community a little later. And it just gets more and more complex over time. And eventually you would start to get trees. In fact, in this picture, you can see some small trees that are growing. And given enough time and no disturbance, this will be a mature forest. Now in the second images here, this is an example of secondary succession. And you can see that it was further away from the blast. The mountain is kind of far away relative to the first series of pictures. And right off the bat, not everything was destroyed. Some of the forest was still alive here. This was probably some kind of a ash flow or something that when it came through, it wiped out part of the forest, but not all of the forest. And you had viable soil. And so within the first year, you would start to get plants sprouting up from that soil. You had creatures still living in that soil that were aerating it and allowing oxygen down there. So plants and animals in the soil. And then it doesn't take long for those trees to start growing. It's much quicker in this case because you're not starting from nothing. You get those trees starting to grow faster and faster. And eventually, these trees will give way to more trees that you would find in a climax forest. All right, thank you very much.